Hi everyone. On behalf of Thought Technology and the Biofeedback Federation of Europe, I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar on how biofeedback benefits your clients and practice. My name is John Bale and I'll be the moderator for today's session. The BFE is a non-profit community interest company based in the UK. Our mission is to promote a greater awareness of biofeedback among health professionals and to educate clinicians in the use of the latest biofeedback techniques and technologies. Over the next hour and a half, Linda Walker will be giving an introduction to the use of biofeedback from her own clinical practice. With the use of biofeedback, Ms. Walker is able to help clients gain an understanding of the physical symptoms of their mental health and learn to offset the negative impact of stress through training. So that you all know a little bit more about our presenter, Linda Walker is a licensed professional counselor and school counselor who holds a master's degree in human relations and counseling from the University of Oklahoma, as well as a postgraduate certificate in substance abuse and school counseling from Western Michigan University. She integrates a variety of methods, including biofeedback and neurofeedback, in her practice working with the general population. Before we get going with the webinar, I'd like to review how this session is going to work for those of you that are attending this live recording. We're going to have 2 question periods during the presentation, as well as a third at the end of the webinar. If you'd like to verbally ask a question in these periods, please click the raise hand icon that can be found in the GoToWebinar control panel. Looks like a little open hand right here. Alternatively, if you prefer to write in your question, feel free to type that question into the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel, and then I'll read it on your behalf at the right time. If we can't get to all your questions today, or if you have questions over the next few days, or for those of you who are viewing this session as a recording and might have any questions, please send us an email at shop@bfe.org, and we'll be sure to get back to you with an answer as soon as possible. Now, without any further delay, here's Ms. Walker.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about biofeedback therapy, and as a counselor, I use this as an adjunct therapy. And the reason I use it is because it's a way to bring my counseling practice together with mind and body. Now, as a counselor, I picked a few of my favorites here, just a sample of counseling therapies. And when I began to use technologies such as biofeedback to add to this list, there was a very distinct reason that I did it. When I started counseling, I began working with adolescents who were very troubled. These were the kids that were incarcerated for severe crimes. They had been through multiple therapies, and here they are in my office after working with colleagues who were quite knowledgeable and having numerous opportunities to have wonderful therapeutic interventions. And I'm wondering what to do with these kids. The list of the therapies these kids could give me that they had been through was quite long, and they all had one thing in common. The thing that they had in common is that as a therapist and as all the other therapists who were working with these kids, all of these therapies and what I was going to do was something that I did from the outside, hoping that somewhere I could touch the inner core of this child in a way that would help him move beyond where he was at. What I began to understand is that a great deal begins in the brain and body. And somehow I needed to be able to get inside, and I needed to be able to counsel from the inside out as well as the outside in. When I started working with troubled teens, this became painfully evident. If someone came to me with, say, a disorder of attention deficit, then typically I found that there were many other things tangled in together. So let's think about a recent national comorbidity study. 41 to 65% of individuals who had lifetime substance abuse disorder also had a lifetime history of at least one other mental disorder. And 51% of those had one or more disorders. So what I was seeing in the individuals that I was working with was a tangle of symptoms and a tangle of disorders. And I needed to be able to get through that tangle to a place where I could work with these individuals. One thing that these other individuals also had in common is that they had been through therapy after therapy after therapy. What I didn't realize at the time, and what I began to realize as I learned about biofeedback interventions, is that sometimes our own physical mechanisms that regulate us get locked into occurring patterns. And so I can say to a client, you know, perhaps you shouldn't do that. And what reasons do you think of that you shouldn't do that? And the client can do a very wonderful job of cognitively reasoning that out. Frontal lobe is great at that. Unfortunately, that reasoning didn't reach the limbic system, which is where everything is locked into place, where that anger, that behavior problem, and that anger reaction first starts. But it didn't start in the frontal lobe. It didn't start cognitively, where I was used to addressing the client. Somehow I had to get underneath that. I had to go past that frontal lobe. And I needed to go where those cyclical loops and those habitual responses are created. One of those habitual responses, and one of the things that exacerbates habitual responses, is stress. And as counselors, we spend a great deal of time working with stress. The stress response is key to many of our issues. And when we look at cyclical patterns, our response to stress and our behaviors in relation to stress play a huge role. And so I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about stress and a few of the dynamics of stress. Many of you will probably already be very familiar with this. And I'm doing this as a way to help you understand our body and our nervous system and how we can get inside and help people learn to become aware of their physiological responses. If I can do that, then very likely I can have an intervention that works cognitively, and I think of that as top down. You think of the brain, kind of the top of the body, and the frontal lobe's the very front of the brain. But I can also have a bottom-up intervention. Biofeedback interventions are typically working through the nervous system. The nervous system connects with the brain via the brainstem. So we think about the bottom-up. And if I can bring both of those interventions together, I have a very holistic intervention. I'm going to start with stress because stress and its impact on the nervous system is a good place to start, number one. Number two, this is a great way to review the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, which underlie many of our issues and problems that we're trying to resolve. So the stress response is a combination of responses. It's not just physical, but it's emotional, it's behavioral. And we can't really disconnect the mind from the body. So when we feel something, invariably, whether we like it or not, there's a body response as well, a physiological response, if you will. Some people call that a psychophysiological response. Those stress responses manifest themselves in many ways and with many symptoms. If we look at these symptom lists here, I'm sure that you will notice a large number of symptoms that you've probably dealt with on a daily basis with clients. Perhaps maybe you're not so aware of the physical symptoms. Perhaps after today's webinar you will be, and you'll start to look at them, especially muscle tension or rapid breathing. But let's think about the emotional symptoms, anxiety, fatigue, irritability. These are all stress-related. Behavioral symptoms, harsh treatment of others, aggression, again, all related to our stress response. I'm not going to give you a biology lesson here. I know that's exactly what it looks like. But I do want to point out that the stress response is due to activation of a part of the autonomic nervous system that's called the sympathetic branch. And there is a regulatory branch, the sympathetic branch, that is different than the other branch of the autonomic nervous system, which is parasympathetic branch. We'll get to that in a moment. Much of what regulates our sympathetic nervous system is the vagus nerve. The recovery occurs when the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system responds. So the sympathetic part of our nervous system is the part of our nervous system that speeds up our heart. It dilates our pupils so that we get more light in. It shunts the blood from our fingertips to our toes, from our fingertips and our toes to the larger parts, larger muscles of our body so that we can run faster. By contrast, the parasympathetic response is that response that I tell people is kind of the maxing and relaxing response. It's when our heart slows down. It's when our mind stops racing. It's when our muscles become very, very relaxed. We're not sweating as much. And interestingly, our fingers and toes are a lot warmer. That's because our body's not mobilizing itself to run away from a predator. If you think about where we should live, if you will, in this state, sympathetic versus parasympathetic, where the ideal balance for people is, it's really a little bit more toward the parasympathetic. By contrast, if we think about what sleep looks like, it's a little bit more parasympathetic. If we look at deep meditative states, it's even more parasympathetic. And we can actually measure this physiologically. We have the SPECT image of someone meditating. And what you'll notice is in the parietal lobe on the right side that the brain is more activated during meditation. We're less activated in the areas of the brain that are important for oriented responses. Oops, sorry, I went past that. Moving back to stress and the stress response. Stress response activates a pathway that's important. And again, I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I want you to be aware of these because we're going to actually talk about the connections to the brain. Oh, this is kind of weird. Pardon me a minute. Not sure why that popped up. But we're back. Okay, so stress activates a pathway in the brain. The sympathetic adrenomedullary activation pathway. It's a very fast-acting pathway, and it secretes some important chemicals: epinephrine, norepinephrine, catecholamines. And why this is important is that it does a couple of things. One, it activates our body. We've all heard of the fight-or-flight response. And when we're activated, we look much more sympathetically balanced than parasympathetically balanced. Here's a panic attack. The big question is, what happens when we get stuck here? So let's back up a bit. We have this nice stress response. A lot of things happen in our body when the stress response occurs. A lot of chemicals get secreted. One of the big chemicals that gets secreted is cortisol. It's a corticosteroid. Physically, what happens to us is our adrenal cortex starts to shrink. Our lymphoid organs start to atrophy. Our gastrointestinal organs start to become less healthy. And there's a word for that. Hans Selye called that general adaptation syndrome. You've probably heard that before. The problem with where we're at right now is that this system used to be activated when historically we were in grave danger. It evolved with us to activate us so that when the cougar was approaching us, we knew to run. And we didn't think about it We just did it. I don't know if you've listened to many of the lectures of Robert Sapolsky or not. He wrote a book called When Zebras Get Ulcers, and there are a couple of really nice recordings on the web. And one of the things that Sapolsky says in his lecture when he's talking about this kind of stress is the message the body gets is repair yourself later. If you're a woman, ovulate later. You have to run right now. Digest your food later. You have to get out of here. That's great when the cougar's about ready to attack you. But what if the stressor that you're responding to is the fact that you didn't pay your bill on time? What if the stressor you're responding to is the fact that the guy in front of you, when the light turned green, sat there? We have these kinds of stresses every day in our life. This is not the cougar. And yet, our body is hardwired to respond in much the same way as if those stresses were the cougar. We don't repair as well. Our immune function goes down. Our psychophysiological arousal switch gets stuck on mode. So our mind's always racing. We can't turn our brain off. We have trouble sleeping. That cortisol, the cortisol that gets released in our brain actually impedes our memory. We have trouble with learning. We have trouble with judgment. And if we stay in this state too long, we start to experience chronic fatigue, exhaustion. You'll hear the term adrenal exhaustion. Interestingly enough, when we get in this state, we get stuck in a parasympathetic mode, and we've lost our flexibility to activate ourselves. We become literally exhaustion and stuck in a state of exhaustion. So when we start to work with psychophysiological interventions, we're actually training people to be flexible. We're training people to choose their responses, choose a stress response versus a relaxation response. Ideally, we want people to choose the relaxation response. We want them to choose a cognitive response that is more connected, it's flexible. We want to give people options and flexibility. One of the things that we do when we start to work with temperature or skin response as a physiological measure is we start to try to decondition the stress response. So temperature and skin conductance biofeedback involves learning a conscious control of autonomic and automatic processes. At one time, we didn't think that we could control our own temperature. We didn't think we could control our heart rate. Those were called autonomic processes, and they were automatic. They happened in the brainstem. The brain marched on its merry way and did those things for us. But we're learning that we can have control of those. Interestingly enough, the simple behaviors that we do can help us have control. Relaxation actually activates the parasympathetic nervous system. When you teach a client deep breathing, and I really don't know what that word is, relaxation via deep breathing, a little typo in my slide there. When you teach people passive muscle relaxation, deep breathing, etc., you are stimulating a vagal nerve response. That in turn stimulates the relaxation response. People begin to link the learning that they are doing with biofeedback to conscious control. So all of a sudden, we have someone learning the skill of relaxation. Relaxation stimulates the parasympathetic relaxation response, and the brain becomes aware of it. Now the PFC, the prefrontal cortex, if you could put your hand on your forehead, just right on your forehead there, right underneath that is your prefrontal cortex. This is the part of your brain that's responsible for emotional regulation, for judgment, for planning, for doing all of the other things that are really good for good behavior and good emotional control. But guess what? Your prefrontal cortex isn't the first actor in this equation. Before the prefrontal cortex gets a hold of a problem, the limbic system has already processed it. If we teach people things such as a relaxation response, we've actually helped people behaviorally practice a skill that gives the prefrontal cortex a little bit more time to regain control when things are out of control. I'd like to talk a little bit about counseling with temperature and skin conductance. And before I go there, I want to see if there are any questions up to this point.
Okay, so let me just jump in briefly. If any of you would like to ask a question to Linda, you can if you'd like to verbally ask a question, you can click that open hand, raise hand icon that's on the upper right of your monitor. If you prefer to write in a question, you can go to the little questions box in that same control panel and then type your question in there. We'll give everyone just a minute to maybe think about what they might want to say or ask in case anyone would like to do that.
Absolutely, that sounds good. This is a basic refresher that we've just gone through, and before we launch into our the other pieces of this, I'd like to just take that moment.
Okay. I don't think anyone has any questions so far. I think we have a pretty well-educated group, actually.
Yeah, probably we do. So I'm going to go forward a bit. If we think about how we're going to really know how people are learning how to relax, really know that they learn those skills, remember, we can coach people through relaxation. We can coach people through learning how to visualize a safe place. But how do you know that they really have the skill? That's entirely another thing. If I gave you a bicycle today and I said, hey, here's this shiny bicycle, look, here you just pump it up and down with your feet and you ride and it can get you to work on time, here you go, see you later. What do you think is going to happen when they come back into my office in a couple of days? Did that bike work? Probably not. Not if that's all I did. If I didn't teach them the skill and they didn't actually practice it, and there wasn't a way, if there was no way for me to be able to measure that they actually got the skill, then learning to ride that bike is completely useless. Sometimes the breathing techniques and the relaxation techniques that we use in the counseling office don't get integrated because people don't learn the skill. People don't actually practice the skill. And one of the things when we start talking about temperature and skin conductance biofeedback is the ability to have people actually see they know the skill. Going back to the kids who I originally started working with, these were very concrete learners. Part of the reason that they weren't learning is telling them that, you know, that's illegal, you shouldn't steal that, you'll get in trouble. Didn't work. They had no concept of that. It was actually doing and learning, and fortunately they did, and they learned, and they were incarcerated. For people who are more concrete learners, biofeedback represents a really nice foundational intervention. When we start to work with biofeedback, we're actually addressing two different kinds of stress, and in this case, we call this anxiety, but truly it's stress. There's the physical body anxiety, and there's the mind anxiety. One's more physiological, and obviously one's more psychological. What kind of stress and what kind of anxiety that we're dealing with will dictate what type of biofeedback that we may be interested in using. So for instance, the somatic anxiety, the fight or flight action response in which adrenaline's built up, in which muscles are tensing. This is when you see the person come into your office and their jaws are clenched and their fists are clenched. Those are very often treated with biofeedback such as EMG biofeedback, or what we're going to talk about today, thermal biofeedback. that goes along with some other wonderful things that as counselors we do quite a lot. We usually do talk about improving diet. We talk about getting exercise. We talk about getting a good quality of sleep. Cognitive anxiety, on the other hand, those are the people that go around with those racing minds. They're always in the what-if mode, always catastrophizing things. Some of those types of issues are best treated with skin conductance biofeedback, in addition to the emotionally based lifestyle changes that we typically talk about. Good psychotherapy, meditation, mindfulness, bibliotherapy. There's a host of therapies that we use on a day-to-day basis that are very congruent with biofeedback. I'm going to take just a quick minute to talk a little bit about temperature biofeedback. I'm going to lay the foundations of both, and then I'm going to show you what this actually looks like in real practice so that you have a sense of where all this goes. First of all, I want to point out that when we're doing temperature biofeedback, the equipment that we actually use to do this is very, very small. What you're seeing on the right is what's called a thermistor, and it's taped on the finger, very, very tiny. And what we're actually measuring there is we're measuring peripheral skin temperature. Okay, what is that? Well, what we're looking at when we're measuring peripheral skin temperature is we're actually measuring the alternation of sympathetic parasympathetic nervous system activity. Interestingly enough, when we have a stress, our temperature decreases. When that stressor is removed, temperature increases. It's a very simple concept, and yet some people are very surprised at how well that measures our stress response. Here's why that happens. Remember when we were talking about parasympathetic activity? That's when we're relaxing. I call that maxing and relaxing. This is when our body's in its restorative state. Our blood vessels dilate. Blood flow increases. If you think a little bit about this, this makes a lot of sense. This is our restorative state. This is the state where our body bolsters its immune system, where our body begins to heal itself. Peripheral skin temperature changes can occur very quickly when an internal or external stimuli is perceived as threatening. And what happens then? Then our blood vessels constrict. What we're measuring is the amount of blood that flows through the vessels under the skin. And again, vasoconstriction is cooler temperature and too little blood flow. Remember, our blood vessels are closing down. Vasodilation, our hands become much warmer, and we have more blood flow. When we have sympathetic nervous system arousal, literally the blood shifted from the hands and feet into our larger muscles of our body, and that's to mobilize us. And this is a very natural response. This is a normal response, in fact. If we didn't have that response, we would have a big problem. If we look at the physiological responses that occur in relation to a stressor, the one that we're impacting right now is the constriction of blood vessels. So you'll see all the physiological responses when we get stressed. We have the ability to directly intervene with one of them. When we are working with the relaxation response, we're using the temperature biofeedback to help the client focus. If you think about what that's doing, rather than having a racing mind and thinking about all of the peripheral thoughts, we're thinking about a single device. We're thinking about a single part of our body. And when we start to engage that relaxation response, our heart rate lowers, our blood pressure lowers. We get the natural vasodilation, which is what we're attempting to do with temperature biofeedback. We have a decreased rate of breathing. So all of those things are extremely important. When we think about temperature, we need to know a few benchmarks before we go on. So our skin temperature, our hand temperature, is much cooler than our internal body temperature. If we have someone who's really tense and you were to hold a thermometer at the tip of their finger, it would register at about 79 degrees. They're really stressed out. You ever known anyone, you shake their hand and their hands are cold, or your hands are constantly cold? That's a sign of tension. 79 to 84 is slight tension. If we're calm, we typically have a temperature of about 84 to 90 degrees. If we're quietly relaxed, about 90 to 95 degrees. Deeply relaxed, over 95 degrees is quite a feat to get to in terms of a goal. So when we think about what some of our training goals are going to be, we know that we would like to get people at least to the 84 to 90 degree mark when we're measuring their temperature. Ideally, we'd like to see them get over 90, and the bonus around is if you can get over 95. The goals of temperature biofeedback are fairly simple. We'd like to raise our temperature 95, 90 degrees or higher, 95 degrees or higher. We're going to use some strategies to do that. We want the client to develop an awareness of what that feels like in their body. We actually want clients to be able to voluntarily raise and lower their temperature by 2 degrees. So activate and deactivate themselves. We want to raise fingertip temperature to relaxed levels within 5 minutes. So let's say that we have a stressor. You have 5 minutes to get your finger temperature back under control. And we want to sustain that increase for longer periods. We're going to develop that awareness of temperature sensitivity in relation to different settings. So be sensitive to how your hands are feeling at home. Are they warm or are they cold? When you walk into the office, are your hands warm or cold right now? When you walk into the meeting room to give the presentation, are your hands warm or cold right now? If they're cold, practice your set of skills to warm them up. You may even have people maintain a warm temperature against a cooling stressor. And this latter strategy is very often utilized with individuals who are having trouble with Raynaud's syndrome. This isn't done just by telling people, raise your temperature. It's going to be done through a series of steps. And a few therapies that you may already be familiar with are going to be very handy here. First of all, Jacobson relaxation. This is the tensing and relaxing of the body. You might use what's called autogenic training. These are coached trainings in which you coach the person to scan their body and relax it. Usually I like to start at the head, and I'll just have people do a body scan. Think about where those tensions are in their body. Usually I have them, for the neck and shoulders, I have them drain that out through their fingertips, and anything through the back and hips and legs, I drain that tension out through their toes. Then I might have people go through and consciously relax each muscle group. That would be an example of a passive body scan. The Jacobson method of tensing and releasing involves actually becoming aware of that muscle, such as your bicep. You tense it, release it. Imagine that you're tensing and releasing it, noticing the difference, and progressively going through each muscle in the body. When you start these types of training, these types of relaxation trainings, you really go methodically step by step. So I start with the head. Notice all of the small muscles in the scalp. Notice the muscles down the neck. Notice your jaws, shoulders, shoulder blades, biceps, triceps, literally through each independent area. As people get more adept at learning to become conscious of those smaller areas, the next step in training is to get people to relax the larger areas. So, for instance, instead of naming all of the small muscles in the scalp, the jaws, the neck, I might say, relax your head and neck. Next, relax all of the muscles in your arms. We want to help people practice this skill so that they can take this home. If they learn the small steps, and then after they're conscious of those skills, we move on to the larger steps, they will learn this skill much better. Breath training is excellent. Sometimes people use entrainment music. There's a really nice piece of music called Breath Sync that they can breathe to the music. Autogenic training is huge. In autogenic training, we might use some scripted sessions. We might say something like, my arm is heavy, loose, and relaxed. And I may repeat, my arm is heavy, loose, and relaxed. I'm going to go through some of this because I want to spend some time with guided imagery. Once we've helped people learn a relaxation routine and a relaxation script, and by the way, there are some very nice ones on the internet. Typically, I will have people bring an iPhone in. They can record one of our sessions together, Coach to Relaxation, or they can record their own so they can listen to themselves, tell themselves the steps. Then that relaxation imagery can be coupled with guided imagery. They may want to think about a relaxing scene. I happen to have Raynaud's myself. So Raynaud's is a condition in which you get really cold fingers in the wintertime when you get next to a cold stressor, like if my hands get very cold, my fingers will turn white. And one of the guided images that I taught myself is to imagine being on a beach and feeling the sun in the center of my forehead. And the sun flows down the center of my forehead and warms my chest. And I begin to imagine that warm wave going down the inner part of my arm and traveling into my hand, into my fingertips. And that's a very, very powerful, relaxing, guided image that can be very helpful for encouraging temperature. I'm going to show you what biofeedback temperature training might look like in the office. I'd like to talk a little bit about training tips before we do. First of all, we want to set our office up for a session conducive to successful training. And we want to set our client up for being able to do this at home as well. For clients, it's very helpful if their back is supported, they're in a comfortable chair. This is one of those times when it's completely okay to get very comfortable and very relaxed. And don't be surprised if your clients fall asleep on you the first time you start to do this kind of training. Noise-free environment is very important. So if you're at home, I tell clients, find a place that you can at least close the door from the barking dogs and the crying kids for a while. Make sure your clothing is loose and not constrictive. When you're moving into a state of deep relaxation, which is what you're trying to do as you try to increase your peripheral skin temperature, those little things such as that scratchy sweater you have on or the constriction around your waist becomes very, very problematic. So I coach my client that when they're coming in, make sure they're very comfortable. I don't care if you wear sweatpants and a t-shirt coming into my office, but be comfortable. Removing contact lenses and glasses are a must, turning off the phone, anything else that can disturb concentration. That includes my phone, so no texts, no cell phones in the office. And to really stimulate the relaxation response, when clients take this homework with them, because they're going to practice this at home as well as in the office, I want them to start out by training at a specific time every day. Sometimes after dinner is a good time. But remember, try practicing about an hour after you eat, because otherwise you are practicing right in the middle of food coma and you go to sleep and you don't get much practice. But eventually you're going to want to practice in different environments, and by that I mean being able to go to the office, being able to go to home, in a traffic jam, etc. I'm going to shift from this PowerPoint and show you what this would look like in the office, what a typical training would look like, and then I'm going to come back and we'll talk a little bit more about some homework tips. So I'm going to shift out of here. What I'm showing you is a clinical grade biofeedback software. What I like about it and appreciate about it is it's fairly unobtrusive. So my office doesn't look much different than anyone else's office. I have a small device that's about the size of it's smaller than my iPhone in length. It gets nicely into my pocket, or my client's pocket, and hopefully it doesn't go home with him. And a few sensors attached to it. And what they might see is a relaxation screen. Now, what you're seeing here is a temperature biofeedback signal, and I have my unit set to Celsius right now, so you'll hopefully forgive me for that. We wouldn't be training at 33 degrees. We would be training in the 80s and 90s in the United States. Very, very simple. This is not anything that you want to have a great deal of high-tech associated with, and you certainly don't want equipment to take away from the therapeutic relationship that you create with the client. In this particular example, the client can view the screen. They can see their temperature rising here on the blue bar graph. They also have a sense on the line graph that's below it on the right side, what it's doing over time, how things are changing. And you'll notice, if you've been looking at the picture at all, the more the temperature rises, they have a really pleasant image of a plant growing. What you're not hearing is the relaxing music that's playing along with the growing plant. After you coach someone to become relaxed, moving to a screen that looks like this one and letting the client quietly sit with themselves and begin to understand their temperature can be very helpful. They get a reward visually. The good thing is that in addition to visually looking at a screen, some clients like to close their eyes. That shuts out visual input, shuts out that visual distraction, and they find themselves more quiet. You can also have the ability to simply just listen to music becoming louder and softer. So when the temperature warms up, the music gets louder. When the temperature starts to go down, the music gets softer. And there are always opportunities for the therapist to be able to coach during this process. I want to pause for just a quick moment and just follow up, make sure we're okay in terms of questions.
All right, so again, this is the chance for anyone who wants to ask a question to do so. You can verbally ask a question by going to that raise hand icon in the GoToWebinar control panel at the upper right. And that'll let us know that you want to ask a question. I will unmute you so you can do so. If you prefer to ask a question by writing it in, you can go to the questions spot in the GoToWebinar control panel, type in that question, then I'll ask the question on your behalf. Having a quick look, looks like there's a question right here. Yes, a question from William. This session will be available at a later time for anyone who attended. We'll be giving out a copy of the recording, so you can listen to that once more in case you missed a little bit of the beginning. I saw there was also initially a hand up from Jack Abernathy. Jack, you seem to have taken down your hands. You're no longer asking, so that's okay. Anyone else have any questions? We'll just give you a moment to think about that. Jack's question is this a new TT software, what we just looked at?
Yes, it is.
It's called the Stress Control Suite, I believe. Is that correct, Linda?
It is correct. It's made for the ProComp 2 unit, which is the really small biofeedback unit. Very simple, very clean, and very therapist-friendly.
A follow-up question coming from Jack is, will PP be available? Capital P, capital P. I'm not sure what that stands for, those two letters, unfortunately. PowerPoint. Yes, the PowerPoint will be available. We'll give out a copy to everyone who attended as well. Okay.
That would be no problem. And also to follow up, for individuals interested in doing a workshop, there are plans to offer a workshop specifically on how to use the hardware and software. Right now, of course, our goal being to look at the concepts and how this works and how this integrates into practice.
Okay. I think we may have another question coming in is, how does one assess this area of temperature? I mean, I believe that's their question.
Very good question. One of the things with temperature or any biofeedback is that we need to do some assessment so we know where people stand. How do people respond to stressors? And actually, I'm going to address the assessment piece of things. If you will, I'm going to wait until after we discuss skin conductance because I want to be able to discuss assessment of both at the same time. But you're absolutely correct, that is very critical. And not only for understanding how to direct therapy or how to tailor therapy, but also to understand how people are progressing.
We have another question coming in before we continue, and that's from Jack again. Would you think that after eating even an hour, the patient would possibly fall asleep from doing this sort of relaxation training or temperature training?
Usually after an hour, not typically, although, Jack, that said, it's not unusual at all for patients first learning mindfulness and first learning this type of relaxation to become very sleepy. What I do as a therapist is I watch them really closely, especially if their eyes are closed, and I may just quietly, verbally interject something in the counseling session. I might say something like, "You're doing really well, stay with me, stay here." And it's okay. I always remind clients it's completely okay to fall asleep. Eventually, they will be practiced enough that they don't fall asleep. Some people might learn how to hover on the edge of wakefulness and sleepiness, and that's a very interesting state that's probably another conversation, but can be very insightful. So I certainly don't want to discourage people from moving to that area.
We have another question coming in from William, and he says, I wondered if after a period of learning an interoceptive pathway established, over time will this need to be reinforced with additional biofeedback training?
Learning to warm your hands is a whole lot like learning to ride your bike. It is remarkably so. Once you cross that threshold, you have that aha moment, you do it, and you understand that you can do it. It's not something that you unlearn. It is something, though, that you have to practice. if I've practiced warming my hands fairly regularly prior to the winter season, then it's very easy for me to shift into a place where I can warm my hands quickly when I start to have problems with my Raynaud's. That said, if I haven't practiced, if I've been pretty rusty, I have to have a period of practice to refresh. We're training that part of the brain when we initially do this, the same part of the brain that learns how to ride the bike. Literally, it's by road. And so that's why you tend to maintain the skill. I think the real key here and the real crux, and it's a very good question that you ask, is if you train the skill and people learn the skill in the first place, then they will retain the skill. If they weren't quite there, they weren't quite retaining the skill, that's where your challenge is going to come in, and that will require some additional follow-ups.
Okay, I think now is a good time to end this question period, and we'll keep on going with the presentation.
Those are great questions, by the way. Let's think a little bit about the coaching process, and a few things to consider. First of all, our clients are all very different learners. Some people learn much better by listening. Some people learn much better by having a visual cue. So if I move back to the screen that we're looking at here, we have an audio cue, that's the music. We have a visual cue, not only the line graphs and bar graphs, which probably appeals to the engineers and mathematicians in the room, but we also have a really nice, pleasing image that appeals to people who really could care less about numbers and lines. It's important to avoid a few things here. First of all, these initial sessions, it's helpful to make them short. People will get fatigued very quickly, so the first sessions may not be more than 15 minutes. In addition, people have to build a bit of stamina to be able to learn how to quiet their mind and stay in that condition, and that doesn't happen in the first 2 or 3 sessions. In fact, you want to keep it short because demands will actually cause vasoconstriction in people who set unrealistic goals. So that client who comes in and they are, by golly, going to raise their finger temperature to 95 degrees the very first time, you are going to cut them off and say, no, that's not our goal today. Practice anxiety is huge. Demand anxiety is huge. And you won't succeed. If you're trying to impress your clinician, you won't succeed. So the idea here is to shape slowly, but not put demands on someone. So when I do this kind of training, I never say to someone, let's see if you can get your hand temperature to 85 degrees today. What I might say is, let's see how warm you can get it today. I'll take note of the maximum temperature they reach. We'll celebrate that. The next time they come in, we might have a discussion. Do you remember what you got to last time? Yeah? Okay. Well, let's try a little bit longer this time and see what happens. So I'm not saying let's raise it up further, not directly. And I'm not placing the demand of saying let's raise it to 95 degrees. Let's see where we get. Now, there may be a time after they've mastered the skill, and there's a key word here, after they've mastered the skill. They've gotten there. They've gotten there on their own. They've become deeply relaxed. They've quieted their mind. They're not trying to do anything, but quiet their mind, get out of their body's way, and let their body do its thing. Once they've reached that stage in the skill set, then you might start to do some challenges. Have someone listen to a stressful recording. Stressful scenes in movies are really good for this. Okay, now, you have 5 minutes to reach your 90 degrees temperature. Then you might start challenging people with trying to raise their temperature a degree by a degree or two. So using this particular screen, same screen, I might say, okay, we've gotten to 34 degrees Celsius. Let's see if you can get to 36 degrees Celsius. Can you go back down to 34 degrees Celsius after that? In other words, can you shift? Can you be flexible? And can you turn it around one way or the other easily? This isn't just going to happen in the office. The clinical equipment that you see here is very, very helpful for learning and for seeing things, seeing the trend, what's actually happening. Is it really going up? Am I just sitting here? Am I imagining it? I'm not just looking at a number. I have a reward for the body. But it doesn't stop in the office, and it can't stop in the office. It has to go home. Ooh, there we go. This is where I want to go right now. And so you're going to send that patient home with some homework tools. One of my favorite homework tools to send home are these little sticky dots that I get at office stores such as Staples. I'll have people put one of those in their medicine cabinet, the door of the refrigerator, maybe the door in which they come in and out of the house, just little subtle dots. Nobody has to know what they are. When you see that dot, I want you to just pause for a minute, practice your passive relaxation scan, scan your body. What's the tense? Take a moment to practice your breathing. See where your hands are. Are your hands warm or cold right now? If they're cold, and you can take just a moment, do some guided visualization. You may just stand and pause and close your eyes for just a second. And my cue that I do quickly for myself is I start at my chest. And remember, I like the visual beach scene with the sunshine. I feel the sunshine right in my chest, going into my underarm, down the inner part of my arm, and into my fingertips. And I just stop for a minute, and I just feel that wave of warmth start to radiate down. And that's my cue. After I've practiced it, after I got the skill, it happens quickly. We don't want people to really rely on the equipment. You want it there to teach people a skill, teach it very powerfully, teach it succinctly, and then we want people to be able to leave our office and use it for the rest of their lives. So it's not about, certainly not about dependence. I'm going to back up a little bit here. This is a sample temperature training protocol. I might do this over 8 to 10 sessions, and you'll notice that this isn't just temperature biofeedback that I'm doing. I may do some Jacobson relaxation. So remember, my arms are feeling warm and heavy. My fingers are warm and heavy. And I would use a screen such as the one that we saw back here. I would turn off the music, and I would let them visually see this while doing the coached relaxation. Then I might turn the music back on. I'll have them close their eyes. At this point, they're not seeing any of the visual feedback, but they're hearing the sound get either louder or softer, depending on whether their temperature is going up or down. And I'll do the Jacobson relaxation exercises in that way. After we've gotten that routine down, and during those first 1 to 4 sessions, I'm sending homework home with the client. There will be a plan for the client first to try that homework at home. Toward the end of those sessions, there will be a plan for the client to try it at work. I'm going to then graduate to straight temperature biofeedback. So back to my familiar screen here. Only this time, I'm going to get out of their way. I want them to practice the skills that we've been practicing together and they've been practicing at home. These are the times when I may add words of encouragement, but I'm going to see where the client can get. And if the client's not quite ready to get there, the nice thing is that this is a learning process for the client, and I can meet the client where the learning needs are, and we can work with that. I have clients keep a stress log, and by stress log, what I typically have people do is day, level of stress, 5 to 10, you know, whatever, 1 to 10, hands hot, warm or cold. Eventually, I want them to note whether or not they were able to use their exercises to warm the hands. And I'll add that one other fun piece of homework that I sometimes will have clients do, depending on their dietary needs, I'll send them home with a piece of dark chocolate. And I know this sounds really crazy, but dark chocolate melts at exactly 95 degrees. This is 70% dark chocolate, by the way, or more, not the milk chocolate. So that melts at 95 degrees. So if they really want to give themselves a test, have a little fun, have a snack, a really messy snack afterward, that can be some fun homework. It's not going to be a way to train them in your office because they need to already have that skill before they try the chocolate or they'll never get there. But a fun task nevertheless. I'm going to shift and talk a little bit about skin conductance, and then I want to discuss how we do an assessment, what we learn from an assessment, and how we track our clients' progress, because all of that is extremely important. I think most of us have an intuitive understanding of what sweat is, and we've all heard the saying, never let them see you sweat. We've probably all had those times when we've had a stressful moment. We really feel ourselves sweat. We may feel ourselves flush as well. Thinking about sweat has some utility, so it's not just all a bad thing. It improves grip on our hands, lowers skin abrasion. It helps us cool ourselves, helps us communicate with each other via pheromones, etc. Just so we can distinguish about what we're working with, there are two types of sweat glands, and what we're interested in are what are called the eccrine sweat glands, and those are the ones that occur on the palms and the soles, the forehead. These are the ones that are under thermal and psychological control, which has really always been just extremely interesting to me. And why are we using our palms or fingers? Well, clearly it's an easy place to put a skin conductance temperature, but the other reason is that we have more sweat glands concentrated in these areas, so a hugely powerful area. Sympathetically, sweat glands are innervated through the limbic cortical control circuitry of the brain. I'm going to go into that just a little bit, but it's interesting to think this little device that we can stick on our fingertips is directly measuring what our brain's doing, indirectly. But nevertheless, it's a very strong indicator of what our psychological backdrop is. When we think about skin conductance, we think about a wide range of psychological phenomena, from unconscious responses to actually cognitive responses involving attention. So what I'm saying here is that when we pay attention, our skin conductance changes. It usually goes up. When we have an unconscious emotional response, if it's a response in which we feel disgust, for instance, or anger or anxiety, our skin conductance goes up. If we have an emotional response that involves love or relaxation, our skin conductance very likely goes down, although I have to say with humor, guess which way your skin conductance goes? It goes up, because skin conductance is a measure of arousal. We know that cardiorespiratory activity is more indicative, and this is a mouthful, isn't it? More indicative of changes in mental stress. Well, let's talk about it. What do I mean? I mean, when we measure our breathing and we measure our heart rate, those measures really are good measures of our mental stress. But electrodermal activity is an excellent measure of the emotional component. And this came from Bernstein, who actually pretty much wrote the book on skin conductance. He's a German psychologist. Wolfram I'm saying this Bernstein. Someone probably can pronounce it much better than I can. This is not a new technology. This has been around, well, I don't want to say forever, but it's been around for a very long time. The first skin conductance device was actually called a psychogalvanometer, and it was invented by a Russian scientist by the name of Tarchinov in 1848. That's just amazingly long ago. In reality, however, the concept of skin conductance was around about 20, 30 years before that. It was being used in France with some in some of the mental health hospitals or sanitariums. We've come a long way from this black and white relic that we're seeing on the left, and things are much more streamlined and prettier today. So I like to contrast the history there. In terms of integrating skin conductance into psychology, we can thank Carl Jung for that. Carl Jung used word association experiments, and he also used skin conductance to observe emotional tone. So what I mean by that is occasionally he would simply give the client a list of words or set of words. He would say them to the client. He would watch the client's skin conductance. But he also used this in relation to when the client was talking about something. And it's interesting, I do this all the time in my office. The client comes in, they're going on about the day at school, they mention their teacher, and their skin conductance kind of peaks a little bit. I might stop and ask what that's about. Carl Jung suggested the higher self knows an objective truth, and reactive arousal occurs when there are some distorted concepts or when there are conflicts within. It's important to understand the brain connection here. This is exciting to me, even though I can't spell connection correctly. This is exciting to me because by simply measuring what's going on in our fingertips, we have evidence through fMRI studies and SPECT studies and PET studies that we are activating and deactivating areas in the brain. What we're looking at here is we're looking at just kind of a composite, but this is the activity before our skin conductance rises on the white slide on the far left. What's being activated in the middle, and then finally the activity that's occurring both before and after events that stimulate our skin conductance. These are some of the same areas that we would like to have activated and or deactivated when we're trying to get people to de-escalate and to move into the relaxation response. So the exciting thing is that indirectly we have the ability to start addressing the brain response. And indirectly, we in turn address the way the brain responds to stress. For skin conductance training, we place sensors on either the fingertips, and I think I showed you a picture of that just a bit ago, or the hand. And we typically would like to see people under a level of 5 microsiemens. And by the way, this is the symbol I'm seeing down here, micromose. This is a measure of skin conductance. It's the old measure. We actually call it now microsiemens. It's actually the same measure, just a different name. And I'll show you what this looks like on the software, but just to give you a sense of what we're looking at here, we're looking at microsiemens. We'd like people to be, when they're relaxed, under 5 microsiemens. If you see someone at 10 microsiemens, they're agitated, and 20, you're often looking at an anxiety disorder or some emotional control issues. I'm going to actually show you this on the computer now because I think it makes a lot more sense than me sitting here looking at a slide. Looks very, very similar to what we saw on our temperature screen, except that you'll notice that skin conductance changes much more quickly. And there's some variability to it. One of the things that we're interested in here is we're interested in not only the baseline, getting this as low as it can go and helping people turn it down, but we're also interested in these moments of variability, what we're seeing here right into the peak of my mouse, and helping people reduce those. Skin conductance can be just incredibly helpful for therapy in terms of understanding, one, what type of responder a person is, and two, if you have someone who is a really, they have a real high arousal level and you really see it through their skin conductance signal, you can really get a lot of good therapy done. I'll give you an example. I had this young man who had an anger control problem, and I had him in my office doing skin conductance biofeedback, and I noticed a teacher walked by and his skin conductance just shot through the roof. And as soon as the visual field of the teacher left, skin conductance went back down. I set a pencil down on my desk and I watched his skin conductance again shoot through the roof. So it wasn't just the teacher, but it was just that he was so hyper aroused. And one of the things that we were able to do is teach him to be aware of that. He never knew the magnitude of his arousal until he actually saw it on the screen and watched his skin conductance shoot through the roof every time there was a sound or every time there was a vision. Simply by recognizing that, he physically began to be able to notice other correlates. He noticed the muscle tension that occurred. He noticed, he described a feeling, he called it his heart, and he said his heart felt really tight when his skin conductance went up. And those were some physical cues that he was able to start to use without any equipment at all to begin to cue himself and bring his skin conductance down. Oops, I missed where I was at. There we go. Some disorders we teach using GSR. Anxiety disorders are at the top of the list, but skin conductance training has some other really important applications too. Skin conductance level can be a really nice way of measuring how successful you are at meditation and mindfulness, as can temperature training. Skin conductance training can be a very interesting training to use in marital therapy, especially when you have both husband and wife hooked up and you're discussing a marital issue. You would be amazed at when you're simply communicating, you'll watch when one gets triggered and the other gets triggered. And sometimes it's simply the use of the words, and one spouse may not even have any awareness that his or her choice of words had that kind of charge on the spouse and that kind of emotional impact. And so simply learning some better communication skills to modulate each other's response and to be able to deliver the messages and the needs can be really helpful. We talked a little bit about emotional modulation. In peak performance training and in pilot training, this is very often used. Individuals may be presented with a stressful situation, and they may be given a short time to get their physiological responses under control, be that skin conductance or be that temperature. So a tremendous amount of utility. One thing that I like to do in my biofeedback sessions is I do what's called sumo training. And in this case, I don't know if you can see the little green circle here, or the little blue circle. I try to, when I'm doing a therapy session, get the patient to keep that dot as small as they can when they're discussing things that are creating anxiety.
Sorry to interrupt. If you just maximize the screen, then we can actually see it. Oops, but I think
I'm
we're done.
sorry. That's okay. Yeah, I can do that from right here. I don't know why it's so small. There, you know what? Here's what I do. Well, of course it's not going to cooperate with me when I really want it to. There we go. There's a little circle, very faint, around this blue dot. And the idea is that, especially when people are really reactive, to keep that response contained, to become aware of it enough that they don't let the responses run away with them or get out of hand. Once people are getting to be really good with one modality, you may want to combine modalities. So this is skin conductance. This is temperature. There we go. So I may have a time when I want the client to keep their skin conductance arousal as low as possible. And I might want them to work on increasing their temperature. Now again, this is not the type of training that I use with the client who's first coming into the office. And remember the demand piece of things. This would put a lot of demand on someone. As they get more skilled, though, this is an advanced training that when they can master this, they've really got the skill. They know how to ride the bike, and they're leaving your office learning how to ride the bike. You can see here when they're successful, they begin to open a flower, and there's a little something hidden in that flower. Now, a few people have asked about assessment and measurement, and I know that we're really kind of bumping up against the end of our webinar, and I want to go over assessment with you briefly.
Just letting you know, Linda, we're going to be going till about 2:45, so we'll give you extra time. And if anyone has to leave early, we're going to be recording this, so we can always give you a copy of that recording to check out the ending that you missed.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So what if you have a client coming into your office, and I'm going to rearrange my screen again here. There we go. And we really didn't know much about their physiological response. Maybe they didn't know much about the physiological response. And maybe it would be really helpful. They know that they have a stress response. They know they're stressed out. Maybe they don't understand how stressed out they are. Maybe they don't understand how their behavior and they respond. That is not uncommon. Many people lack that self-awareness. One thing I may want to do with those clients may be to do a stress test. And this is a great way to get that initial assessment. A stress test starts out fairly easy. Generally, you would like to do a baseline recording. In this particular example I'm showing you actually even has blood pressure with it. Even though we really haven't covered blood pressure, it's there, and you can get a good sense of how that is. What I typically have people do is I place the sensors on. Now, I've already educated them about the sensors, and they're used to them. I don't want to get a response that's stressful just because they have sensors on. So I kind of want them to get used to it. They've held them in their hands. We've kind of talked about them. I'm going to have them sit for a few minutes, just real quietly. It's real important. Sitting quietly is very important. Just hang out for a few minutes. I'm just going to record your physiology. I'm not going to have them see this screen, though. I'll look at it. I just want them to hang out. They're getting their blood pressure measured. They get their skin conductance measured. I'm seeing here, this is a few minutes into a baseline recording session, and what's happening here? Well, if we look at the top line, which is our skin conductance, you'll notice that it's slowly going down. And we look at the bottom line, we notice that it's slowly going up. And that's a really normal, good relaxation response when someone sits and they're quietly sitting there. The longer they sit there, the more relaxed they get. The relaxation response kicks in, and I would expect that to occur just exactly as it's occurred here. After I've measured their baseline, I may want to present them with a stressor. And in this case, the stressor that I present them with is what's called a color words test, and some people will know this as a Stroop test. But their job is to say the color of the words, but not the word itself. So in this screen, for instance, the very top answer should be orange, green, blue, yellow. Oh, it went away before I answered it. The timing on this is quite variable. Some stay a while and some flash quickly. And the goal of this screen is to introduce just a bit of stress here. As a clinician, there are some things that you can do to introduce a bit more stress. So you could say to your client, if they got something incorrect, you could say, that's wrong. Sometimes with my high-performing college students, I'll even introduce, come on, hurry up, you're not doing fast enough, let's go, let's go. Again, as the clinician, you get to decide how much you want to push them. If you have someone with PTSD and a panic disorder coming in, obviously simply going through the process is quite enough, and they don't need any input from you. That's some of the thinking that you have to use as a therapist is how much is okay to introduce, how well is this person doing. A college student, so the college students I work with, most of them in fact, can have these words finished up and be sitting there looking at me, waiting for the next screen, and there's no issue at all. After the color words test, I'm going to have my clients rest again. So we don't process the event at all. And if they start talking about it, so that's okay, just rest, we'll talk about this after we're done. I just want you to sit and rest quietly. Again, I don't have them look at the screen. And this is the response after the color words test. Notice what's happening to the temperature now. Skin conductance is going down. Now the temperature starts to rebound a little bit. After the rest, I'm going to give them a math test. Now, math tests can be made difficult or easy. The nice thing about what I do here is I actually have a cheat sheet if I choose to use one. I can say, I'm going to have you start at 1081, and I'd like you to count backward by sevens. And I'm going to keep track of your answers. You're going to say them aloud. I'm going to let you know if you're incorrect. This is the college level math test. This is the test that you use for people who aren't coming in with PTSD. If I'm working with a learning disabled high school student, I may say something like, take the number 100 and count backward by 2. That might be quite all the stressor that individual needs. And believe me, you will get a stress response out of it. It seems really easy, but you absolutely will. After the math test is recording is done, then I'm going to have them have another rest. And after that, we can look at their results. And I'll show you what that would look like. This is a part that I do talk to the client about, and we sit together, and this is where the whole session is processed, the whole event is processed, and we talk about what they experienced and what we see. So here's an individual. We see the different tasks. This is about a 10-minute stress assessment, so it's not huge, and you have ample time to be able to talk about it afterward and see and talk about how people respond. This individual actually looks pretty good in a lot of ways. First of all, I want to see what happens in baseline. So they have a nice relaxation response occur here. The skin conductance goes down the longer they sit. Temperature goes up the longer they sit. That's fantastic. This is a pattern that many people you will not see. With the color words, they actually maintained their temperature relatively well. It stays somewhat stable. There's some ups and downs. But look at the skin conductance. They really shot up. During the next rest, their temperature came back up again. They're pretty good here with the temperature. And they did a nice job of getting their skin conductance under control. Let's look now at the math task. A little different story here. I would tend to wonder if math had a tendency to stress this individual out a little bit more than the color was. Their temperature starts to plummet. Their skin conductance shoots up again. Notice that it's higher here than it was in the previous stressor. At the end of the assessment, they have a baseline. It's pretty good. The temperature starts to come back up. That's great. The skin conductance starts to recover. But notice the skin conductance level is nowhere near the level it was at the beginning baseline. And every time they have a stressor, it's higher than the last one. So I would wonder if this person is someone who carries stress with them throughout the day. You know, you get up in the morning, you get stuck in the traffic jam, and you're late for work. That's stressor number one. You go into work, and you have a major project deadline to make, and nobody's got anything done. There's another stressor. You get your daughter at the end of the day at school, and she's unhappy, and you know how it goes on. For a person like this, I would tend to wonder if things start to stack up with them. And that would be one of the things that we would talk about. One of the other interesting things that you can see is sometimes people will become highly reactive. The green line, which is the skin conductance line, will just stair step, and it will just escalate, 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 and not come back down. And you know that's a really problematic response. Sometimes with temperature, you'll see a flat line. It never warms up. Interestingly enough, I've seen individuals who have a skin conductance response that shows a great deal of escalation, and what their temperature does is it escalates through the entire task. So you have skin conductance showing the stress arousal level, and then the temperature's not. And actually that's an important finding, because some individuals who disassociate, their temperature disassociates with them, so they just disconnect emotionally. You may find people who have no arousal level whatsoever. They're the flatliners. Those are important findings as much as how they recover and if they come back down to baseline. After you have an assessment like this, you may start to train people to become more aware of their arousal levels and the fluctuation of their arousal levels. You may start to have people learn temperature training, and you may follow up your biofeedback sessions with another assessment like this, and the coaching they're going to get in the rests will be to practice those skills. Where the temperature plummets here, I would anticipate that someone who had learned temperature training would do a much better job of maintaining stability. Now I do want to point out something here. You'll notice the temperature plummets and it reaches its lowest part in the rests portion. There's a couple of reasons for that. Temperature does move a little bit slowly, but it is actually much more responsive than you think, so that doesn't entirely account for it. But what happens when someone who thinks they should do a great performance does a poor performance? Do they inwardly berate themselves? And is that a little bit of what we're seeing here? Are they kind of going over their performance and not happy with themselves? And what self-talk are they engaging right there at that particular moment? Those are some things that we have to ask when we start to do our assessments. I want to check in. Are there any questions at this point?
So this will be one of the last, no, this will be the second last question period for everyone. So if any of you want to ask any questions, again, you can click on that open hand icon to ask a verbal question. I have a feeling everyone's a lot more interested, though, in writing in their questions as we've seen before. So if you'd like to write in a question, just go to the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel, and then you can type that question in there. I saw there was a question actually from the middle of the session coming from William. He was surprised there was blood pressure shown on screen, which there is. As he's saying, interesting, I've wondered if gains have been made in this area of blood pressure with respect to biofeedback training.
It has. Actually, this is one of the first pieces of equipment that integrates blood pressure. Blood pressure is kind of interesting. You can't constantly measure blood pressure like you can skin conductance or temperature. That's because if you had that blood pressure cuff on and it was constantly inflated, eventually you'd cut the circulation off of the person. You'd have a dead hand, if you were. So the way it works with this particular software is that it periodically checks it and tracks it. And so you get a sense of what's happening during the rest periods. And I didn't even talk about blood pressure on the screen, but it is definitely possible to integrate blood pressure with the equipment now and even get a sense of how things shift and change during your stress assessment. It's very exciting.
All right. Does anyone else have any more questions for any of you? I'm going to say a no, so they'll just have to wait till the very end while you finish up, okay?
All right, that sounds
All
good.
right.
We're really close to being finished up. I do want to go back to my PowerPoint here. Just to let you know it's here, there's a lot of technical information in the PowerPoint which will be shared. This was a PowerPoint that I made for my students at Western Michigan University. So you'll see a few narrative little microphones on it. They will not follow the webinar, but you're more than welcome to tap in and listen to what was being presented there. And hopefully it makes sense. And I also want to point out, I talked a little bit about Robert Sapolsky earlier and some of his talks on stress. One of the ones that I really like to send home with my clients or have my clients look up is the very top one, Why Zebras Don't Eat Ulcers. It's a video, not a video, it's a audible lecture. So you download an MP3 of it, and it's great. It's quite humorous. The other two that I list here as references are not ones that I typically share with my clients. They're quite a lot more serious in nature, and the one on depression is quite grave, but certainly an eye-opener to those of us who are doing therapy and to begin to understand the real importance of getting depression under control because of the damage it can certainly do to our bodies. I am just about wrapped up here. I wanted to go through a final thought to look at some statistics here. And I know everybody loves statistics who's attending, but I think it's really important that you are at least able to have these numbers and send them home with your clients. It can be extremely helpful. So if I go back to my scripted session. Oops. This is a really nice big screen view of that last stress test we looked at, and you can really see the moment-to-moment changes very well. And you'll notice there's a little red line over here. I can move through and see exactly what my skin temperature was or my arousal level was at different points in the stress assessment. But importantly, I really want to be able to track this. So not only is it about processing this with my client and understanding where they were, but I want to make sure that I save these numbers. So you'll notice here we have a measure, this is a mean measure of their first resting baseline blood pressure and their average skin conductance levels, average temperature levels. And I have these numbers through all of the tasks. What I like to do is I like to be able to print those out, and I can do that. I save those with my client file. And this is the baseline by which I can measure their progress. And when I do a follow-up post-stress assessment, I'd like to see if these numbers are changing, if the mean temperature and the mean blood pressure and the mean skin conductance is shifting a bit. So important to track it, important to be able to have these to give to clients. What did we achieve today? We have something tangible. I've been able to look at what's going on inside, and I've been able to help them modulate that. At the same time, I've used all of my other counseling therapies to work from the outside. And hopefully, we've gotten to a point where we can have these two worlds meet and do some really powerful therapy with clients. So this is all I have. I do appreciate everyone for listening and attending. I will open it up for questions again. I don't know if we have any extras, but...
Thank you, Linda, for your outstanding presentation. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's webinar. I hope you'll leave with a greater understanding of how biofeedback is used in clinical practice and how you might put to use some of the information provided today. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact us at shop@bfe.org. I'd also like to thank today's webinar sponsor, Thought Technology. If you'd like to learn more about their stress control suite or the biofeedback measurement tools discussed today, feel free to check out their website, thoughttechnology.com. Shoot them an email, mail@thoughttechnology.com, or give them a call at 1-800-361-3651. If you're interested in learning more about the applications of biofeedback or neurofeedback, you can also visit our own website, where we provide online education and continuing education opportunities. Our sites are bfe.org and bfe.org/bi. So again, on behalf of Thought Technology and us, the Biofeedback Federation of Europe, thank you for joining us today, and we'd hope to see you online again soon. Have a great day.